Ready? Going on, it's Cole Kruger, Ian Quinn, Andrew Hodor, Henry Kruger, Brett Perry.
1 lap to go, 1 lap to go. Sheila Akowitz getting through on the inside. Connie Paris-Gevin lining her up now. It's going to be a close one. Here they come.
You got a Wolverine jersey on. Remember asking you at had the abbreviation WSC on the sleeve. I said, what's that? Oh, that's Wolverine Sports Club. No, man, that's Walden Still Controls. And Walden was cycling in Detroit.
I remember a girl telling me, one of the bike riders, he scares me because he's rough, you know, he's rough and tough, but he didn't scare me.
He really liked people, and he knew that he could really help people become much better.
I think he counted it as a success if he just made him a better human being in some way.
And Connie Paris-Gevin, world sprint champs coming around here. The Good lead winning the ladies 6-lap scratch race. Big round of applause for Connie Paris-Gevin.
When I die and go to heaven and they meet me at the gate and hand me the golden chalice of never-ending vanilla lattes, and there's Mike, you know, pointing his crooked finger at me, you know, like, why didn't you build another track, you worthless piece of... I don't need to listen to that for 100,000 years.
He had an uncle in New York that got him interested in it. When he was just, like 9 years old or something like that, he moved here when he was about 9 or 10. In Detroit here, there was a fellow named Hugo Brown. He loved the sport, and he used to go with Mike. I don't know really whether he trained him or did any of that. He read anything he could about it, and about not just cycling, in training. You know, that's what, when he came up with intervals and spinning and all that sort of thing. You know, he found that out probably about reading about it and then himself trying it out. Well, he knew Torchy Peden. He also knew Jimmy Walther, who was the idol of the 20s when he was a 6-day racing star.
Near the 8 Mile, they used to have a board track. So I'd bring Belgians over there and they'd ride that track.
When they were trying to revive the 6-day circuit, they brought in Hugo Colbert, and the next year Colbert won the Tour de France and the World Championship. We got to be pretty good friends with Colbert because we go over to Belle Isle, and the only thing they ever practiced was a little of the sprinting and pacing.
When he got into the bike business and they sold Urego bikes, then they had the Urego bike team, and then eventually all those people went into the Wolverine Bike Club. He wanted me to join the Urego Club early on, and I had belonged to the Wolverine, and I said, I'm not going to race. They'd have these rides Wednesday or Sunday, something like that. And pretty good rides, like for me at least, it was like 100 miles on Sunday. That was a long ride. Then on Wednesday nights, we'd go out to maybe Farmington Hills. We always ended up at an ice cream shop with Mike. He always directed us right to the place where you could get the biggest ice cream cones. That was our treat after riding all those miles, an ice cream cone.
I didn't own a car until after I come out of the service. I rode in Illinois I finished second in the Illinois State Championships when I was stationed at Great Lakes. And I used to train with Jules Audi, who was a 6-day rider, and I'd ride to Milwaukee with him. He hated me because I'd work him out.
Jim and Claire were both ex-Marines, and when they come back from the war in 45, they missed a lot of their good years. And when they came home, I think they were going to have a good time, come hell or high water, because sure as hell beat getting shot at and being in the Philippines. It was pretty hard-nosed Marine guys, you know.
Well, I belonged to the Wolverine Wheelmen, and that was organized by Jack Fletcher. When I'd show up, they'd say, "Hey, here's Claire. We're in for a good one today."
Jim Smith came in later probably because he was part of the Eastside Wheelmen. Eastside Wheelmen used to be a pretty active club with some good riders, a lot of them Belgian. Some of those riders came over to Wolverine. But Jim came later than, say, Claire. Because Claire was always kind of in the fold. You know, he and Mike were pretty close. And Claire was the aficionado on skating, you know, and Mike was cycling.
The Eastside Wheelmen, Jim Smith was one of them. The reason he joined our club, I think, is because we had consistent schedules. Mike set up a program for it. We'd ride out Woodward Avenue, go to Pontiac and back. We'd work out around the Franklin Hills there, you know. We did a good job of bringing up the riders.
Mike gave up racing probably as really quite a young man. I think he gave up racing sometime like he was 27 or 28, maybe even 26. So he gave up the competitive side of it and became really the coach of everybody at that point, the manager.
Just getting us down there at 7 o'clock and 8 o'clock in the morning was the coaching part. Just getting us down there, and then we would compete, or getting us over to Belle Isle and ride a 50-mile race at 7 in the morning and be done at 9. You know, just being there and organizing it was the coaching.
Mike did a lot of guiding of those kids.
Because I'm sure in 1939, when he became the coach of the Wolverine Sports Club, he did not have a fully formed plan in his head, and he did not know, well, if you do this, this will happen. I mean, this all sort of evolved.
What he did is he created the environment for the athlete to excel in, and all he had to do then is plug the athlete in, and the athlete would either survive or they wouldn't. There wouldn't have been what we called the Pontiac Express, which left from Palmer Park and went out to Pontiac and back. So those were every Wednesday night.
I worked for the railroad, and I couldn't get off when I wanted to go out of town and that. But I continued riding, and I got into the speed skating. Bill Thompson, he used to be the coach, speed skating coach. And they had a meeting in Berkeley. That's when they formed the Wolverine Sports Club.
It was pretty interesting life, different but interesting. Going to bike races in the middle of the night and that sort of thing, which they all did. They all worked, you know, had full-time jobs, and on weekends it was always a bike race, Chicago, Somerville, wherever.
My father was a bike rider in Italy, and then he got my brother into it, and consequently I followed. We had a grocery store, and I got up in the morning. Grocery store was on Gratiot, and I'd get up early. I'd get on my bike and ride to Belle Isle and put my 30 or 40 miles in, and then come home and go to work. Well, I won 4 national championships, 47, 48, 49, and 50. Bob started racing because my father got him into it. He was 15 years old when he won the Joliet to Chicago race. He came home with a huge trophy. He won that race amongst all the seniors, and it was on a rainy finish. He qualified for the 48 Olympics. That was in England. We left together for San Diego, and that's where he had bad luck again there. He had that bad accident. His bike flew up in the air, and his face was in the cinders. We never made any money. All we ever got were medals and trophies.
I joined the Wolverine Sports Club in 1947. Don Mataski then took me to the bike shop on Michigan and Livernois, which was Continental Sport Shop at the time, which Mike Walden and Gene Portuese owned together. From having no real sports background, I found this bicycle racing thing, and it was really a wonderful feeling to be competitive.
It wasn't like you were never unaccepted, you know. You might be inept and get yelled at for doing stupid things, or you got the snot beat out of you every time of these guys that have been training for 2 years and you had 2 weeks.
Mike was really a father figure.
I met Mike in the first place. I actually worked in a bike shop called Royal Craft, so they said, go see Mike, and I didn't know who Mike was. So I went down, I bought a used Humber. He said, why don't you come out and ride the club rides? And I think before the summer was over, I had sold the Humber and bought a used Lignano, which was a real racing bike as opposed to the Humber, which was what we called English racers. You couldn't find a better person than Mike, even though, you know, he could be growly and gruff and verbally abusive. But he just switched that off and was back to the, you know, the big teddy bear before long.
I got started when I was a young man. I needed a job, and I went into a bicycle shop and applied for a job, and it was Mike Walden, owned the bicycle store. I was 15 years old. Didn't have much of an education, and I walked in and I said I needed a job. He said, fine, 45 cents per hour, I'll hire you. I was elated. And for the first 3 weeks, he made me clean the darn basement.
Well, the state meet was always in Chandler Park, and it was like a circular road in the park.
Well, we started riding at Chandler Park, and I was the boss there. And Cappy used to hold races. He sponsored races at Chandler Park, you know, because well, he had a Chrysler dealer that he was working for, and he was one of the big sponsors for the race.
Claire was there, you know, when I got there, and Claire was the perpetual state champion. I think he won it 7 or 8 times. And of course, I knew Claire and his first wife, Georgia, and all 4 kids. We'd traveled together. We always traveled with 5 or 6 people in a car just for economic reasons. And we would go to pick up Claire, lived on Smith Street in Birmingham. And Georgia would have the kids out on the porch.
And they were all at the door crying, "You're taking my daddy away from me." And they were going to Chicago to a bike race, but he went. It was that way with all of them that rode like that.
Claire he operated on the shoestring. I mean, he always had to pack a lunch. Never could stop to eat someplace. He always, you know, scrounged and brought his own sandwiches and stuff like that, and he used to bake a lot. And of course, his wife, Georgia, was a real sweetheart. She passed away, and Claire had these 4 kids that he hauled around all over the place. Great credit, great guy.
Claire, early on, he said, well, we're going to stay in this. It's a family activity. We can all be together. We can all do it. And that's how he held it together. Claire would take Us, when when my dad had to work and my mom couldn't go, we'd go to skating meets with Claire. We had a van, it was called a Thames. The thing had no heat in it. I mean, we went up to Barrie, Canada. I'll never forget this trip. We went up to Barrie, Canada. It was Claire, my Aunt Esther, my sister Karen and I, and Claire's kids, and I don't know who else was in there. It was unbelievably cold all the way up there. But we finally get to the place where we're gonna go into this hotel, and he goes, "Okay, you kids, hit the deck. I don't want anybody to see how many people are in here," because they got one hotel room for all of us. But Claire had no problems being that way. He was always the practical guy. Claire took most of the skating stuff, and Dad did the cycling, and don't mess with the cycling. He didn't like anybody saying they were a cycling coach.
My time was spent going on. I can show you places where I've been, but for the kids, I always had to never forget my job. That I had to put the bread and butter on the table. The kid's mother died when she was 37, and I raised the kids up.
He lost his wife Georgia, and now he's working for Bud Wheel, and he's got to go to work, and he's got these 4 kids, and they're pretty young yet, and he provided for him. He came home and he cooked for him, and then he grabbed, and he shut, howdy doody off, and you went down to a rink. I was doing the same thing at my place.
It was sort of a given, that in the wintertime that we speed skated, as there was a transition between, because we were sort of locked into natural ice.
Well, the cycling career began as a result of my dad giving me 50 cents to go down to Belle Isle to a speed skating race. So I found out that the skaters rode bicycles in the summertime. So I bought myself a bike when I was about 14 off of the earnings of a paper route. And then I ran into Mike Walden and Claire Young on a corner of 13 Mile and Woodward Avenue. They asked me, did you ever think of bicycle racing? And I said, well, yeah, sure. Mike was always organizing the races, and he always had some comments, and he was still riding at that time. It was good to ride against him because he was a master at bike handling. We had everything we needed to go to the top. We had the knowledge, we had the enthusiasm. We didn't have the money. The first bike race I ever rode was on the Ryan Bank track. At that time, I rode a team race with Claire Young, and Claire was 30 years old and I was 15. So we were the oldest and youngest guys on the track. That was a former 6-day bicycle track that they used to use indoors, but they put it outdoors, and they had a masonite cover on it, and it was 10 laps to a mile. So it had about a 68-degree banking on the turns. That's how I was initiated. The pack was down here, and I was way at the top. I didn't want to get near these guys. The top riders in the country were there. I hung in with them, and everybody said, you did fantastic. And I said, hell, I'm just trying to survive. What are you talking about, fantastic? The first race I ever rode longer than 50 miles was the Olympic trials. Now it was 116 miles. So I'm on the Olympic team at age 17, not in, riding 3 races over 50 miles. Whoa, the Olympics, I'm into some big time here, man. I might be in over my head,
I worked for Mike. He was the coach of the Wolverine Sports Club. Very, very good coach. And he would go to the races on Sunday. And he said, why don't you come with me? And I went with him a couple of times. And then I raced a couple of times, and things progressed, and became a bicycle racer, all because of Mike Walden. But had I not gone for that job, I'd have never gone to the Olympics in 1960.
As a bike rider, he was terrible. I remember one time we were riding a track race up in Canada.
That was the first time I ever raced on a velodrome or a wooden track. I was a young guy, and Tom was a seasoned veteran by then. And he took me up to Delhi, Canada, on an indoor velodrome where I had never ridden in my life.
And he fell down about 4 times in the same race. But everybody loved him because he kept getting up and he kept going again.
They had a prize in the end. They had a $50 prize for the most popular rider.
He got last place, but he was the hero that night.
I got the sympathy vote and I won the $50. As I pedaled around, the bandages were hanging off my legs, my arms were bleeding, my shirt was ripped, but I won the $50.
He would go good when the racing really got tough. The more competition you threw at him, the better he was. In fact, Billy probably would not be in a bicycle business if it hadn't been for Mike Walden. Mike shepherded him through the early days on that, teaching him what to do and how to do it.
When I came from the Olympics in 1960, and again with no sheepskin or a place to go for a job, he said, Billy, I've got an idea. Why don't we start a store? You've got the credentials because we can put the name Olympic on it. And then I was on my own, and Mike did his. Since then, he was very successful. He operated, he had his store in Detroit, and unfortunately, after the riots in 1967, in a testimony to what kind of guy he was, when the riots came and there was a lot of violence and shooting and fires, his black customers would actually come to his store and help him. I mean, he was a great guy, tremendous guy. I never lose sight of the fact Mike Walden is the guy that made it possible for me, and I will ever be grateful for him.
Mike deserves all the credit in the world for being the greatest promoter of bike racing in the country. And I don't think anybody else even comes close.
If you know anything about Chandler Park, the rush to the line started after the last turn, and it was a sweeping left turn. And if you weren't careful, you could get into some crashes there that left some people pretty beat up and bloodied over the years. So you had to be very careful on that turn that you didn't do anything funny. Actually, I won Debates Race 2 years back to back. I won it in 1970 and 1971. But this time when it broke up, it was just me and a guy by the name of Bill Logan. And I want to say Bill Logan was out of Indiana. When it came down to the end of the race, Logan was trying to talk me into letting him win the race. And of course, that was never going to happen. And we came around the corner and I just took off, just throttled on past him and won it all far and away. And when we crossed that line, oh boy, what a feeling, what a feeling. And the din of the crowd cheering. Couldn't hear anything, couldn't hear a thing, nothing. There's one person I heard in that whole crowd, my dad.
Everything revolved around such and such an event. If you ask what year did such and such happen, it would always, well, it was the day of such and such a race, or the year of such and such a race. That's how you defined the calendar, was by the races or the events. And we would have like spaghetti dinners, we'd have regular spaghetti dinners, and Fred Cappy was generally in charge of that, and we'd cook it in great big cauldrons, really, the spaghetti.
It was always about everybody being together and having a good time. 5:30 in the morning, phone calls for him to go meet somebody to go training. Packing up every weekend to go to either a bike race or a speed skating race. I never thought of my dad as a cycling coach when I was growing up. It was not my frame of reference for him. We owned a bike shop, and my mom worked it in the winters because my dad actually had to make money to feed us, so he was a boring mill operator, and he was very good at what he did, and he could have made lots more money doing that, but cycling was his passion. He would get up at 5:30 in the morning with you and go out to Belle Isle and yell at you from his van while you were riding because he cared about what you did. So if you turned on him, that wasn't going to work for him at all. We used to go to New York a lot. He had a whole New York connection, not only family, but a lot of his good friends were out there. Al Tofield was responsible for building the Casino Velodrome in Casino Park in New York, but him and Al Tofield worked on it was the Pepsi Marathon, and when it became the Pepsi Marathon, there was one in Central Park, They used to shut down Central Park, and there was one on Belle Isle.
When President Kennedy was president, and he was promoting fitness, physical fitness, and he had they were promoting, if I remember, 50-mile hikes.
So Mike said, if they can get an average person to walk 50 miles in a day, there's, you know, a halfway decent bike rider could go 200 miles.
We started it, and the first year, which it was 63, we had 40 people, and it was all basically club members. We'd keep them supplied with food. There were 40 fellows and a few girls too, I believe. But our families were all down there.
The 24-hour was great because we had, that was another thing. I mean, there's no way in hell that they were going to ever let anybody go on Belle Isle at night, and there was no way that people were going to stay there for 24 hours. And Mike pulled it off. He convinced the Parks and Recreation and the city fathers that this is a good deal. This is something they should do. You had to go through like a little neck down area when, as you made a lap, you had to go through this thing. And that's how you proved how many laps you did at the end. You had to have the proper number to get your patch for whatever mileage you completed.
The second year, we decided to do it again. We told George Vann about it.
The late George Vann was a writer for the Times, and he was a writer for the News. He was a good friend of mine because he was involved in speed skating as well as bike riding. He said, "Why don't you make it open?" I said, "Yeah, that's not a bad idea," so we made it open. The year before, we had 40-some club members go out and ride 200 miles. Then the next year, we made it open. George put some publicity in the paper. We had 280 people come out.
Each year, George would write more about it. He put all the results and he put everyone's name in. And we got more and more people. We had to drop the food bit, but then they eventually kept the casino open because for 24 hours, that's where we based everything. All the scoring was done.
There was a guy in Detroit whose dad used to be a recreation director. His name was Denny Rails. And Denny worked for Pepsi-Cola Company. And then he got Pepsi-Cola Company for a sponsor and publicized it. And one year we had over 10,000 people participate in the marathon. And then it really went big.
We had all the picnic tables all around the balcony there. And we had these poster boards with columns for each of their designated things like 25 miles and so on. We had their name and their number and so on. And everything was done by hand. And all this was prepared ahead of the race or the event. And it would be held in our house. We'd have these work parties and we'd have poster boards and numbers all over. And we'd have, for a week ahead of time, we'd write everyone's name on these posters and draw lines and everything. And you could ride your 5 laps and come up, and we could tell you which poster board your name was on. We would go over there and camp for basically 48 hours because we'd go Friday afternoon or evening and stay till Sunday afternoon. And it always used to amaze us that, and still does, I mean, you have so many people camping, all kinds of people, all kinds of backgrounds and races and so on and so forth, never have any trouble. It was just a wonderful occasion, and the only time of year you could camp on Belle Isle.
I'd have to say from the days that Fred Cappy's track at, I think it was at 9 Mile Road in Ryan, when that track folded up and disappeared, the racing scene here in Detroit yearned for another venue for a track. They wanted another track. They'd do anything to get another track. And the realization of those dreams was the Doré Velodrome.
But even the story of making Doré is typical Mike. where you know, what did he do? He told the city, if you give me the land, I can get nationals. And then he calls up the governing body, I don't know what it was called, then the ABL or the USCF, and said, if you give me nationals, the city will give me some land. So it's like the checks crossed in the mail. And they both said yes, and then he just lined everybody up, as only Mike Walden could do, and said, all right, you guys, yeah, we each got to pony up.
The area was donated by the city of Detroit. The dirt came from the interchange of the Davison I-75 freeway, and Fred Cappy and others had access to bulldozers.
We had a lot of Italian people in the club at the time too, and they did the cement work. And their various compatriots would do. One of them was Stam Rusin and Vince Muzzin.
They got the cement donated, I think, and got people to work on the track for nothing or next to nothing. I mean, that track didn't cost, no, I'm sure there's some expenses they had to pay, but it was mostly all donated cement, donated labor, and that sort of thing.
The whole family went over there, and we, you know, graded it and did all kind of everything they wanted us to do, and we worked on it. It was a club project, you know.
I think it rained like every day. I mean, we were on this deadline, and it was just constantly raining. And that was, my dad was the surveyor on that, and he'd go, we need a little more dirt over there. We need a little more dirt over there. And there was a big, giant boulder in the middle of the infield, and my dad always was saying, I'm going to get that boulder when this is over. I'm going to get that boulder and take it home. And he came in one day, God damn son of a bitch, somebody stole my boulder. Somebody stole the rock.
After he had left, I rented a trailer, and it took about 10 of us to push that damn thing in, and we hauled it all the way to his house from Royal Oak and set it right in front of that garage door. He couldn't open it. Had a big, nice big plaque on it.
They had taken the boulder, made a plaque, and brought it to my dad's house, my mom and dad's house. The plaque is off of it.
It was really pretty amazing. And then it was just got ready just before the Nationals. I mean, they were putting a stripe, I think, on it when the people for the Nationals came in.
The Nationals were successful and all got pulled off. Everything was okay. I mean, that was an example of he recruited everybody. Everybody pitched in. Everybody pitched in to make it happen. You know, my next door neighbor, who really never liked cycling, but she was there doing registration, and I mean, you know, he got everybody that he knew to help with it, and they all helped.
I grew up in Detroit at 7 Mile and Ryan, so the old DeRay Velodrome really wasn't that far. And I'd ride down there, and I'd take my, Schwinn heavy-duty paper route bike and do a few laps. And, there was this one time where I was on the, that would be the north turn. And I'm just sitting there, eating a Snickers bar. And that's where Mike would always stand, right? And the guys would come around, he'd yell out, and I thought, man, who the hell is this guy? and then one time he looked right at me, and I went, oh, I must be in a restricted area, even though I'm the only guy there. And then he broke into this big smile, like, man, isn't this cool?
We finally had a velodrome, and it was a place that he could train people without having to be a bike rider or in a van to do it, which he was very successful at, obviously, of training people at that velodrome.
He was dominant in his ways. He wanted things to go that way. Because I can remember I'd be down on the infield. The guys would be riding, and Mike would say, "You watch and see what's going on down there, and tell me what's going on down there." And the infield that I don't see. Because Mike had one eye that wasn't good. He was concerned about the whole of a bike rider, not just his bike riding. He wanted to make sure that they were mentally developed into nice people, people that you want to talk to, associate with. Hey, we could go any place, talk to people, because everybody's got something in common. The weather or something, they got something in common. He would not always talk about bike riding. His philosophy was A1. I mean, he wanted to do the best thing that he could within his means for people.
On that track, he would always say that you could learn more about bike racing in 1 year racing on the Velodrome than 5 years racing on the road. And it's absolutely true. I mean, you go to the track and 5-6 times a night, you start, you position yourself, and you finish. You take some wild flyer and you get beat. Next time you try it differently. Next time you try it differently until you finally figure out exactly what your move is.
And then all through the 70s, yes, that was definitely the time where Sheila got her basic training, and Roger as well.
She and Roger won the nationals. I think it was 73 that they won the national championships together. And I rode around the track with them, you know. Tears was in my eyes, and the people like Fred Cappy and Mike and those guys, they all were so happy that both of them had won the nationals.
We didn't have a lot of money in those days. We stayed in the campground. Jim and Terry, they were all there, and we stayed in the campground. And we cooked hot dogs to celebrate, and the kids had won, you know.
And the kids did. They did pretty good there in '73. They they beat some pretty good bike riders. Well, Sue Navarro won the national. Sue used to train with us at Duray.
Started speed skating back when I was 11 and did that for a couple years and realized that the better speed skaters did something like bike racing in the summer. That was in 1969. Just so happened that year that they were going to have the National Cycling Championships in Detroit on this new bike track, this new velodrome. So one thing led to another, and started getting connected with people down in Detroit, and was able to race the event in 1969 in Detroit and got third. And I'm like, hey, I kind of like this, you know. And it was through that event that I started, and my dad, he and I were in this together, kind of a blank slate. We didn't know anything about cycling other than we liked it. And got connected with the Wolverine Sports Club after that, and started racing and training with some of the people down in Detroit. Didn't Mike yell at everybody? It didn't really matter whose team you were on, but certainly if we were part of the Wolverine Sports Club, he was involved in some way, shape, or form. Even living up here in Flint, though, my dad was my major coach, trainer, on a daily basis. He did purchase a small motorcycle so that we could do some motor pacing. There were times when, you know, my dad, again, because there was so much to learn about the sport for both of us, my dad would spend hours talking, just standing there on the side of the velodrome, or, you know, at some event talking to Mike, just picking his brain, trying to find out, you know, what is it that we need to do in order to be the best. You know, we'd take it back here to Flint, and we'd put it into practice.
Speed skating and riding a velodrome were so complementary that both Sheila and Sue Navarra, and then after that, Connie Paraskevan all went through that same discipline.
Like when he absorbed the Berkeley Speed Skating Club, because he knew his club needed something to do in the winter.
I used to meet Claire and Sheila and Roger and other Wolverines out at the hill near Farwell Field. We trained there in the fall every year. And running up the hill with a future Olympian, it didn't cross my mind at the moment because Sheila was just one of us, but I knew then she was something special just because of her amazing, not only strength, but just technique.
Here she is coming from the Detroit area here, you know. We always think, well, the big, strong Russians, they're the ones that are going to win it, the guys from Holland and Norway, these big, strong, good skaters. And here's a kid that's been training at Farwell Field and Belle Isle and running the hills at Bloomer State Park. She goes and conquers the world. It was marvelous.
To give out the medals, they were giving them out in the arena. My daughter Sue come out. She said, "Dad," he said, "how come you guys inside?" I said, "They won't let us in." Sue, I said, "You tell him they can mail Sheila's gold medal to her, or mail her awards to her. Go get Sheila and tell Sheila to come out here." One of the guards there said, wait. And then they put Dorothy and I up where they shoot the cameras, way up above. That's where we watched the ceremony for the gold medal.
We had a parade down Woodward. We got the keys to the city, and we took the kids out of, I think they were in high school then, or middle. We took them out of school anyway to go down to the luncheon at, I guess it was Cobo Hall.
Sheila had something special. Through her training technique, was able to overcome the sheer strength of some of those European and Russian women who had dominated long track on their size and power for years. Sheila brought a bit of finesse to the sport, long track version of the sport, and I think that changed the dynamic of the sport for years to come after that.
You go to DeRay, and there would be Sheila and Sue Navarra fighting it out, at a local race. Then you go to state championships, which would be at DeRay. It was the only track around, and then they'd be fighting it out for the state championships. Then nationals, it'd be Sheila Young and Sue Navarra. They'd fight it out there. Then they go to Worlds, and it'd be those two coming down to it.
That was pretty incredible. And that, Sheila and Sue would battle each other at the Worlds, and it all started at this little track in Detroit.
Where else do you find yourself training and competing against national champions and world champions on a weekly basis? There is no other place, So I think there was an aspect of iron sharpens iron, where we were racing and training against each other so often, and making each other better, that by the time we got to the world stage, it was just like a regular race that we had raced many times throughout the season.
So you had two women here who were, if one wasn't winning the gold, the other one was winning the silver, and this went on for several years now.
That time frame between the 70s into the early 80s, that because we had each other to race against and to train against and to focus on, and we knew if we could work hard and get better at racing against each other, then at the world level, when we race somebody else, we'd be all right.
And here you could go to a local track, and there might be 20 people there watching, and probably all family members. But you're seeing the two best women sprinters in the world.
Just that statement is pretty incredible. And DeRay was not the best facility in the world. So what do you do? How do you do that?
That was the value of the Doré Velodrome. If you were to say there was a goal, or if there was a goal behind what Mike was trying to do to get that velodrome built, that was it. I mean, For Mike to have coached 3 world-class world champions from the same club, from the same track, it's just phenomenal. It's stupendous.
When my dad passed away in 1980, and he passed away in April of 1980, and you know, he had been my coach. So at that point, we had to make some transitions. I was married. My husband and I had talked about, okay, what do we do? Because this was, you know, we were still very much in the thick of things as far as competition goes. We were trying to figure out, you know, how do we deal with this, you know, and try to stay focused for the year that laid ahead. And I just remember my husband saying, you know what, I will step up to the plate. And we would go down there 3 times a week, faithfully, and do the practice and the training at the track in Detroit, as well as doing all of the training and other things that needed to be done here in Flint. And by golly, if we didn't put it together that year and win the World Championships in August of that year, which was very special to me. And I was a Wolverine at the time. The support that came when my dad passed away, and you know, people were cheering for us to see what we could do, and it was magical. It was magical that year.
One day we were skating. We were training at Fraser in the hockey rink there, and I saw this little gal and said, "Well, she looked pretty tough. She had a pair of hockey skates on." And so I said, "Come here," and I talked to her a little bit, and I said, "Why don't you join the club?" And she did, and she developed into a very good speed skater.
This young 15-year-old came on the scene, Connie Paraskeven, and she went to the Worlds at 15, I think, and came in 5th. He was coaching 3 women, Sheila Young, Sue Navarra, Connie Paraskeven, all within the same time frame. And they all made each other better, because basically every Tuesday night at the Concrete Oval was the World Championships. He was in the forefront, especially his success on the women's side, because he had 3 world champions, 9 or 10 world championships, gold medals. And the Russians were strong, but Mike had basically beat them to the punch.
We had an edge in a lot of ways that made us work even harder, knowing that we didn't have all of that support that maybe another country had given their athletes, but we had enough. And we had more support than any other club would be giving their racers, you know, as far as not only coaching support, but also assistance with equipment and travel.
Mike was such a unique character that although while he was at the track and coaching, everybody was afforded his information. When he sat down with you, he'd set up your training program specifically for you, and he wouldn't share what he was doing with you with anyone. It was between you and him and God. And sometimes he felt he was God.
Camp was that's a whole chapter. Camp was a hoot. He loved camp. In fact, after he had his stroke, the first thing he did was to go to camp.
Up until that time, he wasn't willing to coach anybody except for Wolverines. If you wanted to be coached by Mike Walden, it was very simple. Become a Wolverine, and then he'd give you his full attention. So it was really the first time we've convinced Mike to go beyond the just coaching the Wolverines to saying, hey, you've got a great message. You've got a system that works, and you've got a system that creates riders from nothing. Mike was taking people who had never ridden or were tourists and turning them into national and world champions. And I think that was a crucial difference between Mike and most of the other coaches around the country. So the camp was the first time that he was really affording anybody who wanted to come to these camps the information he had. And he was very generous. What he felt was an important thing was to train coaches as opposed to necessarily train riders. You couldn't get enough riders together at one time in one location to have a national impact. But if you could get a whole bunch of coaches together, or people who wanted to be coaches together, you could train them who could then go out in the field. So Mike came to me and said, Dale, will you help me with this camp? And so that's how the Walden School of Cycling started.
He always had friends all over the country, but he really got a little bit more well-known from the camp. And that I have to give credit to Dale for marketing that. He got it organized, we had schedules, things happened. It was like, it wasn't so slipshod as it used to be.
It was great. I mean, what a fun thing to do.
We taught all the road skills down there. Every morning we would get up and we would teach riders how to go through corners, how to ride through pylons. We would teach them how to handle their bike, and we would get green riders in on Monday and turn them out like really good riders by the end of the week. That camp was a great camp. It was a development camp. It wasn't really set up towards the top-end racers. It was designed to make the standard, the average cyclist better and safer.
Even nowadays, traveling around, I still run into people that talk about the Walden camp all the time. They remember Mike Raby, they remember Mike Walden and Mike Adderhole and these guys that all were down there and you know, training in the small ring, and thought the Walden camps were the best thing since sliced bread. I mean, they loved it. And so it affected a lot of people. I mean, even as many years as Mike has been gone and as many years as the camp hasn't been going on, I mean, people know that I'm from the Wolverines, and they know from the Detroit area. And in a way, that's their connection to the Wolverines and to the Detroit, to me, is the Walden camp. And so I many times at Tour of California or big race, Tour de France, I get people, hey, the Walden camp, man, it was great. It made a lasting impression. Mike made a lasting impression on a lot of people.
Jim, I don't think people realize how important Jim was to everything, but Jim was, he was a speed skater and he was a cyclist as well. He was part of that threesome. But Jim and Claire and my dad just kind of did everything together. And Jim would take on my dad. Claire would not take on my dad so much.
They were the most active participants in the club. Mike, obviously, because he had brought the club back from obscurity into a viable entity. Claire, because Claire was Mike's lieutenant and did a lot of the background work to keep the club together. Jim Smith, while they were cohorts in the younger days and they were very good buddies, Jim Smith seemed to spend a lot of his time doing rides on the east side. Every once in a while he'd come out to the track and ride the track, and Mike and Claire would give him a hard time about riding on the track, but funny thing, they weren't on the track, Jim was.
They truly loved each other like brothers, and they took care of each other like brothers. They kept each other in line. And my dad needed to be kept in line on a lot of stuff because my dad could be quite domineering on things.
Yeah, he was the guy that you liked him or you hated him. You hated him because you knew you were wrong. He was right. Yeah, he was always right.
I remember on the last day, we're all sitting in this room, and Mike's, I think he was 78 at that time, and he's up there talking, and he says, everybody put your hands out. And so, you know, we all do, and there's like 25 of us, and he's like, look, I'm not going to be around forever. Cycling is, you know, going on, and everyone asks where cycling is. Where is cycling? Well, look in your hands. That's where it is. And that's how he ended the whole thing.
The strength of the club has always been the touring side. But our touring club didn't act like a touring club. Our touring club acted as if they were a racing club, but they were all tourists. The touring clubs would go out for a ride, nobody would ride a pace line. You know, they just go out and ride their bike, and it'd be people here, people there, people would start and they'd finish. Just go to the local little restaurant and have some pancakes. Wolverines always did pace lines, always did pace line, always a rotating pace line because they knew that was efficient.
Prior to 78, 79, there were some friends of mine that had gone out and tried to do some club rides with the Wolverines, and they came back with stories that said, oh my God, you know, we got 5 miles out and I couldn't hang with these guys anymore, and they scared me to death. I thought I could never ride with these folks, you know. And somebody got me to start going down to the Wednesday night Royal Oak ride, which has been going on forever. And I went down there, didn't know anybody, and you know, you go out and ride 25 miles, and it's you know, it's an easy ride. And I thought, well, this isn't so bad. This was a lot of fun. And back in those days, this would have been probably summer of 79. There could have been 100 people on one of those Wednesday night rides, and it was just something else. I remember going out to Battle Creek. They had some ride called the Serial City Century, and it was a 150-mile bike ride. You know, I ran into TJ Hill at the start. Everybody was registering and getting their bikes ready, pumping up the tires. TJ came up to me, and he kind of recognized me, I think, from the Wednesday night ride. He was the ride leader back then. He said in a way that to me was the ultimate challenge. He said, will you be starting with us today? And I thought, well, why don't you think I'm going to be finishing with you? But all I could think of was, this is great. I can't wait to get out and do something. You know, during this 150 miles, they're talking about, well, you know, next week we're going down to Columbus Fall Challenge, and then we're going to this ride and that ride. And this was near the end of the season. This must have been mid-September, and I'm just can't wait to dive into this, you know, with both feet.
When I transferred back here from Cincinnati back to the Detroit area, I'd be on the pay rides around here, like the One Hell of a Ride or the Ossenmacher, and what would happen is this Wolverine pace line would go by me. This double pace line was just so efficient and so fast. I thought, man, I'm going to ride with them guys one of these days.
Go Wolverine!
Tom Schuler was the most successful product of the Wednesday night ride. And the Wednesday night ride went through Birmingham and Bloomfield Hills, and it went very close to Tom Schuler's parents' home. And when he was 12 years old or something, and he saw all the bikers, and oh, that's really great, yeah. So then, you know, shortly Tom Schuler started going on the ride, and then all of a sudden, you know, Tom Schuler is one of the superstars, as well as Jeff Pierce, who were members of that first 7-Eleven team in the early 80s, and then Jeff Pierce won the final stage in 1987, so, which was another hallelujah for the club.
Jeff Pierce was a little bit older than I was, but when I was coming up the ranks, he was you know, one of my idols, one of the guys that I knew came from the Wolverines, was racing professionally. And then, of course, you know, the 7-Eleven team was Eric Heiden and Tom Schuler and Ron Kiefel and Finney and all these guys. And so you'd, you know, go to these races and you'd watch the senior race and see these guys just tearing it up.
Frankie and the girls needed more as far as training and coaching. So we went with the Wolverines, and that was 1979, around that time. Because you know, the team was a much better team, and Mike Walden's reputation was very important to us.
Walden was definitely a heavy influence, and so, and of course my father. You know, we used to get dragged, and back then it was sort of, sometimes it was being dragged to the track at 8 Mile and Mound. You know, the Noriet Velodrome, and Walden be out there, and yeah, lots of memories of Mike screaming, yelling, and telling you to, you know, to do it right and get your heels down, but it was all in a good way. It was all in a caring way, because, you know, after that he would tell you that you did a good job, or this is what you need to work on. And so it was, you know, it was an aggressive approach, but in a positive manner. And I think only somebody like Walden is able to pull something off like that.
I remember going and meeting Mike Walden. He was actually at his bike store, and it was almost like I was going through this interview process, and I was exceptionally shy. And there was this big guy, and his big voice, and I was sort of almost cowering behind the nearest wheel, and he said to me, he says, "What's your best pursuit time?" And I said, "Well, I just won the bronze medal at the Nationals, and at that time I think it was just over 4 minutes outdoor track." He looks at me and goes, "Not bad, but you can do better." He goes, "You want to do better?" I said, "Yeah." He goes, "Then I can help you." Again, like, I was very shy and very quiet. He bellows out at me from across the track, "What are you doing? I told you to get in that line!" And I almost fell off my bike. I was so terrified. I was like shaking, and I never stepped out of that line again. And, you know, but after a while I realized that's just Mike. And it's just his personality. He demanded the best, and his yelling wasn't a mean yell. It was just Mike. You had to learn to accept Mike. And when you did, you had the best coach in the world.
List the ways that you can beat somebody, and then list the ways that somebody can beat you. You come up pretty good with a pretty good program, real quick.
He could tell when the kid needed some encouragement. And that's when at that time, he changed and became a father figure. That happened with Frankie, one of the early national championships in Bisbee, Arizona. Very hilly. Frankie just came off the back.
And he was just heartbroken. And I remember Mike, going up to him and putting his arm around him and saying, "Hey, this is only, it's not a problem. You'll be fine."
Frankie was kind of crying, and Mike took him, grabbed him by the arm, and said, "Don't worry, you're going to be doing okay." And that's the type of person that he was.
Midget, intermediate, junior, and then last year junior, I finally won a national championships in pursuit, and that was with the Wolverines. And so that was, 15 years of racing with them. And the other thing I remember a lot about the club is that really it was like a family. I mean, when my dad did a lot with mechanics and taking us to all the races, and then we shared a lot of that responsibility with the Parks family. I remember traveling around, they had this big bus, and I went to, I couldn't even count how many races on this bus and traveling around. And then whenever you're at the race, this Wolverine gang always hung around with each other, and they helped each other. And it was a really nice, in a way, family club atmosphere.
Unfortunately, in '84, in every sport you have the political things. Even though I placed second Canadian Olympic trials, I didn't go to the Olympics. And, I was very devastated, but I got to do the women's first Tour de France, and I was the first North American to win a stage. And I had my little victories there. But when I came home at the season end, Mike and I and my dad would always get together and we'll talk about the season. And, Mike said to me, "Well, how do you feel about the Olympics?" And I said, "Well, disappointed, of course." I had gone into the season not necessarily thinking I could make the Olympic team, but I had just as good of a chance as anybody else. But to qualify and not go, that was something taken from me. And Mike just said, "Well, we have to make sure that never happens again." He goes, "You have to get so good that they can never make that mistake again." That happened to Sheila, that happened to Sue, and he goes, "It happens," and he goes, "and you have to persevere." And for me, those people became role models. Yes, they were near the end of their career, but near the end of their career, they had world championships underneath the belt, national championships underneath the belt, and you could just tell they were byproducts of Mike. That same gritty, the same determination, and all of Mike's cyclists had the same personality, generous and extremely dedicated.
Because there were so many good racers, especially women racers, all at the same time in this area, we as women got equal support as the men did, which was unheard of during our time in cycling. So we were very fortunate to be coming along, I think, at this stage of the game, and we're able to capitalize on that.
I have a lot of good memories from the track days, with Claire being there and racing and riding with a lot of guys that probably many people don't remember. Like I remember Mike Mole, Hans Peterson, Scott Berryman, Paul Jacqua, racing around the track. And these are, maybe they're not big names as cyclists, but to me, they're big names, because without these guys that were riding there, who came up through Mike Walden, and without Mike being there and Claire being there, and TJ Hill, Jim Smith, Charlie, Leonardo, and some of these guys, I don't even know their last names. That's who these guys are, And when I was young, these were the older guys taking care of me, pointing me in the right direction, giving me tips, and that made a huge difference in the world, because it was a club. The Wolverine is a club team, not so much a racing team, because it seemed like everybody really cared about how the other riders were doing, because they wanted to see them keep doing well. And I think it definitely was very beneficial for me.
As Frankie became a better rider and started doing well at the races, I think between him and Claire Young, they helped a lot getting Frankie to be accepted in the junior team for the 7-Eleven team.
I broke in and got the contract with 7-Eleven, and that's when I changed clubs. In a way, I changed clubs, but in a way it was almost sort of the same family, because it was Jim Akowitz, who's married to Sheila Young, who's Claire's daughter, and Roger was there, and so they all knew each other, and that was good, because then again there was Pierce, there was Schuler, so there was it was kind of a transitional family, but it was still part of the Wolverines, but kind of separate. Back then they had a track program and a road program, so it was kind of the roadies on one side, the trackies on the other side. Roger Young was the coach of the track team, and again, I learned a lot from Mike Walden and Claire and racing on the Noriet Velodrome, but there's a big step going from the Noriet Velodrome when you're a teenager to trying to make that transition to a first-year senior, or even becoming professional and going to Indianapolis, going to T-Town. And so my first kind of professional coach was Roger, and I learned, Roger really taught me a lot about how to train like a professional, be a professional, the intensity that it takes, how hard it is to work in order to get that success later on in the races. And I'm sure a lot, what he was teaching me, he probably learned from Mike Walden, because that's who, and Claire Young, who he grew up with racing also. And of course, Roger had tons of experience from Europe in the 6 days.
Thanks to Roger's training that Roger gave Frankie in Indianapolis at the track over there. I think that helped him get a place to go to the Olympics in Korea.
Seoul was my first Olympics in '88, and it was on the track, and I was coming off of that 7-Eleven track program. I started off as a pursuiter. I wasn't very good at pursuing, and so during all these track events, you always do kind of different events, and I started kind of finding my niche being the points race. So I went to Seoul. I made the Olympic team in the points race, and I was excited. I was motivated. I was in kind of over my head, because it was my first Olympics, and I was still very young, going against some pretty good riders there.
Until eventually Jim was in the around 91 or 92. Thought that Frankie was ready for the tour. He was just very happy just to be able to finish. Well, he was very happy just to finish all of them, all 9 of them, as a matter of fact. Yeah.
We had Frankie come in that particular December for the annual awards banquet, and this was the year after he had almost won a stage of the Tour de France. So he came in and he had a video clip of this particular stage, and I think it was the last stage of that previous year's Tour de France, and everybody in that room had seen that stage on TV when it happened, and we all knew what was going to happen, which was that Frankie had broken away early during the stage, and he was trying to hang on, and he was trying to take that stage victory on a breakaway, and he's narrating it from his perspective, and the energy in that room was unbelievable. But the funny thing was that you could look around the room and you could see everybody, their fists were clenched and they were glued to that screen, and then the energy, and everybody was like putting their energy toward that screen, thinking that, if we just tried hard enough, maybe this time he'd win.
You're pulling for him, but you could just see that it was just going to get so close. And I remember asking him, what was it like to get second place in that race? I mean, that's a hard question to ask somebody. And he's like, Ray, it was like any other race. You go out there, you make a move, and, somebody beats you to the line, and that's what it feels like. You know what it feels like. You've been beat to the line before. I'm like, Frankie, it's the largest race in the world, in the largest stage in the world. He was always a really humble kind of guy that way.
One evening, we met Frankie and the team at the hotel, and we were sitting in the lobby talking, and my wife had gone to Lourdes, and she brought some holy water with her. And so she took some holy water and rubbed it on Frankie's leg. Frankie was sitting next to her. And Frankie said, oh, no, hey, stop that. Don't bother me. The next day, he got second on the race. And so my wife was saying, if you would have let me put the holy water on the other leg, you could have won the race.
'96 was Atlanta. I made that Olympic team, and that was very motivating too, just because you're in your home country representing the U.S. in Atlanta, so there was a lot of pressure. And leading up to that, I had struggled immensely in the 96 tour. I was horrible at the tour. I couldn't get out of my own way. And I just kind of stuck through it because I knew I had to get through that tour to have that kind of base and intensity to be able to get ready for Atlanta. And the last part of the tour, I started taking it easy and just riding, and I started kind of finding the legs. And it just, it paid off when I got to Atlanta. I had a fabulous ride there, probably the best, almost of any race really for my strength and being up there. So, I ended up fourth, and it was great. I was happy that I pulled it off. Without all that development and that being structured in that certain way to be able to ride a bike correctly, I would never have won the races that I've won or been able to do what I did. I think one of the things I remember probably the most, cornering. Mike had a different concept of cornering than kind of what's traditionally out there, kind of holding the bike more upright and trying to continue to pedal around a corner. And in criteriums, when it's dry and it's fast, you just lean the bike over and you can go. But when it's raining and it's muddy, Paris-Roubaix, and it's nasty out there, you can't lean the bike and go because you're just going to slide out. And so I think I can remember, I can remember at times taking this technique of holding the bike over and leaning over and keeping your weight over the bottom bracket and trying to pedal around corners to be able to keep the speed and keep the momentum and not slide out. That's something and that I definitely, took over to Europe with me.
It was a shame when the track just fell apart. But there was no fence around it, so you could drive your car on it if you wanted to. And it just fell into disrepair. But for the times that it was open, maybe 20 years, it was money well spent.
It's a shame because it's historical. It's so many world champions have been developed on that track, and so many Olympians, so many world-class athletes, and for the city just to let it go, if anything, they should be making it into a monument.
Dale Hughes made velodromes, and he was pretty good at it, and he lives right in Rochester.
We rented a small little place and started building a track. And so I built, 1975, we started that. And Mike gave us some general ideas of how to go about it. And then we sort of just figured it out ourselves and built this velodrome that was 125 meters. We figured we'd build it the size of a hockey rink so we could just pop into an arena and pop out of it. We thought there was a lot of promoters around the country that all they needed was a portable velodrome. So we thought we were supplying something that was in demand. So we built it. We could build it, put it up in 24 hours and take it down in 9.5 hours. We held U.S. Madison National Championships for 76, 77, 78. Roger won all of them, Roger Young and Danny Van Hout. Roger and Danny were an incredible team. And then in 1979, I got a call from Universal Studios. They were making a movie. It was a remake of an old Shirley Temple movie, and it was called Little Miss Marker. So we took our track out to Santa Rosa, California, and took about 25 bike riders with us. We were extras in the movie. Starred Walter Matthau, Julie Andrews, Tony Curtis, Bob Newhart. We thought we were going big time after that. We thought this is it. We're dealing with the big time.
June of 1997. Dale, I want to talk to you. And he said, well, what's on your mind? I says, what would it take for you to build another track here? So he thinks for a bit. And he says, you go out and raise $100,000 in pledges. You do that in 2 years, and I'll give it a shot. So we go down, we have the meeting, and then at the end of it, it says, well, we got this little proposal here. This is what we'll do. If you pledge and then actually donate $1,000, you'll get your name on a plaque, and we'll nail it to the track. Well, I'll do that. And you kind of look at Claire. Oh yeah, I'll do that. Look at that guy. Yeah, me too. So I had like 14 grand walking out of the meeting. I'm like, oh, this is gonna be easy. Little did I know that was all the easy money I was gonna get. I would go to bike clubs meetings, and I'd say, we'd like to make another track. And I had this little 3.5 by 3.5 sticky note, and I wrote at the club, like Wolverine's 60, this club 10, that club 5, this club 20, whatever. And I figured it added up to $100,000. So that was my plan. I had, wow, Mike, 30 years ago, he knocked me over, Mom, all that stuff. Like, yeah, okay, but do you want a track or don't you? You let it die. We had the club banquet in October, and I invited all these representatives of all these other clubs, and I knew beforehand we had 104. And Dale's sitting there, with his feet kind of moving a little bit. He's getting a little nervous. So finally, it gets announced where it's $104,000. So he's got to go up there. It's like, oh my God, what have I gotten myself into? It took 2 years to find a place that would accept it. We'd like to put a velodrome here. No, we don't want that. Well, yeah, but we'll build it and give it to you. No, we don't want it. What always seemed to really close the deal is this is being done for, Mike's memory. Yeah, and even to this day, it opened up in May of 2001. We've never gotten any corporate money. We had to put it together, too. It doesn't come all assembled. So we had to, drill the holes and pour the concrete and weld it together. But it was just such an American thing, where this is what we want to do. We're not asking, the government to build it, or we're not, GM, give us all the money. We just did it ourselves. It was pretty cool when we had the superstructure done. It looked very cool. And then, the surface shows up and we're starting to nail it on, and that's great. We got the first piece on the straightaway, and I said to Dale, I got my bike in the car. And I put on a skin suit and a helmet and brought my bike, and stuck it up on the straightaway, and now I'm gonna make this quick.
We were putting on the surface in November in short sleeves and shorts, because we had a November that was wonderful, and it was like, wow, we're gonna actually finish the track before winter time. So we finished it, but we didn't put a lot of screws in the panels, because we were just trying to get everything custom cut and get them there. And so we had our first few races, and it was noisy as heck. And people loved it. It was a little bit disconcerting for some of the riders because they weren't used to it. But I went there one day and I started putting some more screws into the bottom half of our panels. And the head of the Parks and Rec come up and he says, what you doing? And I says, well, we're putting more. He says, I'm putting in more screws. He says, well, you're not making it quiet, are you? Said, no, it's going to be a little bit quieter, but, So that sense, this is from someone who had never seen track racing, never seen bike racing, never knew anything except when I finished the Velodrome and came to the first race and saw it. That's why I know my tracks are rumbling tracks. I make them so that when you ride over them, you don't feel it. It's totally smooth, but there's vibration between the board and the steel underneath it, and it rumbles, and people love it.
I ended up being invited out to the Velodrome to watch an uncle's friend race, and went out the next day for the lessons to learn how to ride, and got out on the track and loved it, and kind of fell in love with that, and raced the track the rest of the summer, and then they put me on a road bike at the end of the summer and started racing that. So pretty much from the beginning I was racing.
There's Casey at the front again.
We had our first national champion come from a rider who had never ridden the track before. 3 years ago, she came up to the track and said, it was in November, October, end of our racing season, came up to one of our races, says, I want to do this. And she was, I think, 18 at the time. We've taught her for 2 years now, and she went on this year and won the National Collegiate Points Race on the track for national championships, got a national jersey, and then went to Elite Nationals and won the U25 under 25 woman in the points race.
I got started at the Velodrome, which was really lucky for me because a large amount of the riders who ride at the Velodrome are fairly experienced riders. Many of them are Wolverines. So I basically got started with that. I'd say they all helped me. Everybody was very helpful. When you're on the track, that's one of the pluses to the track, is that even when you're a beginner, you can receive consistent and constant help from people who may be a Cat 1 or a Cat 2, just simply because you're all stuck on this oval velodrome. There's no they're not up the road and you're struggling off the back. Everybody's together.
Lap after that, you'll get the bell. Then we'll pull, then a bell, then we pull, and keep on going down until we get to...
My love has always been track cycling, absolutely. My love has always been the Madison, because I think that's really the game. It has pursuiting in it, it has match sprinting in it. Yes, you can throw some special events in your old program, but the focus should be the Madison. Now, the president of UCI said to me, Dale, Madison, too complicated. People can't follow it. My argument is no. The announcer has to educate, but no one's going to learn all the rules off the first time. Our motto is basically we have to win this war one rider at a time and one spectator at a time. So what Mike started is continuing, and it's a love of the sport. It's specifically a special love for the track, and specifically a special love for trying to make everybody a better bike rider, and proving that the track isn't for elitists. The track really can be for anybody.
And when I was first starting, you know, Claire would come out to the track and somebody would go, you know who that is? And I'm like, who? That's Claire Young. And I'm like, oh. They'd explain to me who Claire Young was. And I can still remember being up on the rail before, I don't know, it was a points race or something. And he's up there with his little digital camera, you know, taking pictures of everybody. And he's standing right next to me, and he looks right at me and goes, you stay on a wheel. You stay on a wheel. I'm like, okay. And the whole race, I'm like, I better stay on a wheel.
Back in the 70s when Claire came to practice, skating practice, I remember vividly, I mean, here was a guy whose daughter had won Olympic medals, who really had done it all himself, who could have moved on, retired from the sport. He'd come to practice, he'd show an amazing interest in beginner skaters, young skaters, skaters with not necessarily natural potential, and he would really work with them, mold them, and more importantly than that, encourage them, because without the encouragement, as I said, it's a tough sport to master, and you really need that self-confidence instilled in you. Claire had that innate ability to do that, and to this day, I still remember that because it's something that we try to do when kids come out.
For 20 years, I held clinics down in Jackson for the kids till I was about 82, something like that, and developed a couple good skaters. Put it this way, I made a lot of cakes. Somebody else put the frosting on them.
Claire probably has had the most impact on me in terms of being a Wolverine member and supporter. From running up the hills with him back in the early 70s to him schlepping to races and coaching and prodding. You know, there was a time in the late 80s, early 90s when Wolverine almost lost the speed skating division. And not too many people are aware of that because there weren't too many speed skaters around. I'm probably the only one still around who suffered through those times when there was little interest on the Wolverine board's part, I think anyway, in keeping speed skating going. Even with Claire's support, the board was dominated, I think, on the cycling side.
When I first started taking over the speed skating, there would be speed skaters who say, well, why do we have to be part of the Wolverines? You know, why can't we just have our own speed skating club and write the checks when we need them to be written and, you know, have the money that we need to have? Why do we need to do a fundraiser and pool all of our money with the cyclists and then, you know, wonder if we're going to ever get the money back? And so, I mean, that's crazy that they don't feel a part of the club enough to know why we should be in it.
In the last Olympics, I think it was one of the keys of the Winter Olympics. I know it dominated the last Saturday programming because we had a lot going on, and every year after the Olympics are broadcast on TV, we get a lot of calls, and we end up with a lot of new skaters. And unfortunately, we have to wait 4 years before that happens again.
Well, I actually got started watching the 2002 Olympics in Salt Lake City. And I first started when I I think 8. I first played hockey before speed skating.
Well, when Andrew wanted to try speed skating and found that he loved speed skating, just with any sport and with any parent, starting with the Mike Waldens and Claire Youngs, you see that the parents are the ones that have to step up and do the work. And when your son is passionate about it, if any of your children are passionate about it, then you have to pick up the reins and volunteer and get involved.
I've met so many people around the U.S. and Canada. I always look at the registration form and see who's going to be at the meet. And I think I would never have had any friends like how I do in speed skating if I was still in hockey.
Well, it is fun. I mean, Andrew talks about the friends that he's made, but we've made a lot of friends ourselves. It's who we socialize with. It's virtually every weekend you're going to a different meet, and you look forward to seeing your friends at those meets, whether it's the children or the parents. Speed skating is definitely a family thing. That you see Bob Sklar, his daughter, Doug Bell, his daughter. You see generation after generation. You see Claire, Sheila, Ellie. You see that over and over again. It's a multiple generation sport. We have kids that are 3 years old, and then we have, Dick Klein, probably in his 80s, who is skating. So it's definitely a sport for life.
You have these families like, the Andrews and the Coyles and the Parks and everything. But there's also the mom, too. And the mom is doing a lot of the work that isn't getting done because the kids are off training, and the husband's whipping them with a whip to get them to do it because she's got to do all the extra duty. So it certainly was a family deal.
Nowadays, both parents are working, and the options that they have to put their kids in various programs are extremely numerous.
The races are 30 seconds long, a minute long, and 45 seconds long. But that's only a fraction of what really goes into being a champion. It's all of the preparation work. There is no easy way. There is no shortcut. It's the day in and day out. It's the training. It's the nutrition. It's really a parent's job, especially when the kids are young, to motivate them to walk the fine line of not pushing them too hard, but pushing them a little bit to stay on the right track. And it's having those Wolverines to train him at the hill, to train him on the ice.
I'm more of an instructor than I would say a coach. Most of the kids that come out and skate with us that are serious motivate themselves. And so as the coach, I have to manage a group of people that go from very advanced to beginners. Ideally, it'd be nice to have separate practices for beginners and have them work their way up, but with a group as small as ours is and how expensive ice is, we really have to manage everybody, at the same time.
It's just great to be in a club where there was Olympians, and I've talked to them, and they're helping me out too.
Kids can be strong, they can be athletic, they can have natural talent, but I think having the role model really helps in a sport as complex as speed skating.
Claire Young suggested we get the hill training back up again. He was telling Andrew at the banquet how this is some of the things that he and Mike Walden put together in what they felt took all of these Wolverines to the Olympics and to the national and international level. And so they started that up again. They asked Andrew to come. He's one of the very few speed skaters that do come with the rest of the cyclists, but it brings them all together, and he's doing, again, the same workout that they did when Mike Walden was coaching.
Ontario did give me a lot, and to go over to the Wolverines and to have that gift, and that gift is carried. I mean, now I take my children there, and it's a different sport. They're in speed skating, and the same thing, that if you have the desire, you have the discipline, they don't care who you are, they don't care what your name is, they don't care if you never make it to Olympics, as long as you have those qualities.
The idea is to see how far you can go in a 12-hour period. We're starting at 10 a.m. By 10 p.m., then you're done. You can stop anytime you want, you can take a break,
You can quit if you want. If you're done by 2 in the afternoon, you don't have to keep going. It's up to you. Ride at your own pace, be safe, and have a good ride.
I think a really big tradition with the Wolverines is the Wolverine 200, and they've been doing that for years. And we have one of up-and-coming Michigan speed skater, also a cyclist who remembers, all of those Wolverine 200s, and she came back, and so now we've incorporated this inline marathon, and it's nice to hear someone like her talk about remembering coming to the Wolverine 200 as the cyclist, and all of the people and all of the nice memories that are associated with growing up and being at such a neat, fun family event.
This is the 45th consecutive running of this event. The history of this event continues. We haven't missed a year yet.
Even though it's been a good number of years since I was a dues-paying member, I still consider myself a Wolverine. In the back of my mind, I always will be a Wolverine.
This club was the result of one guy's lifelong passion that Mike Walden took every aspect of this club, whether it was cycling or skating.
He was a presence. When Mike was there, you knew he was there.
To have somebody come along and just dedicate their entire life to the sport, like Mike did and Claire did and Smitty did that too.
None of us are saints. Neither was Mike, but you have to hand it to him that because of the push that he had, a lot of people accomplished a lot of great things.
After I was older and got to know him a little better, he was not this, gruff person. That was his method. He just wanted you to do your best.
Picazza, what's his name, the guy that played the cello, and somebody said to him, well, I'd give my life to be able to play like that. And he says, I did.
If you don't come off that thing relaxed, you're kidding yourself. And the guy grunts and moans off the line, he's wasting his time. Anybody that's got his jaw clenched, I'm going to start, he's making a major mistake. That's showboating, because that's an indication he's not relaxed. Okay?